When a Brit first comes to drive in America, he's bound to be confused by the rear lights of American cars. Now obviously I'm going to stick up for the mother country here, as the folks in these here colonies have got this idea of automotive design completely wrong, surely. Yellow indicators are far clearer to see than red. And if you're following some American cars, the only indication that the driver has actually stamped on the brake pedal is when the already red taillights glow just a little bit, well, redder. For a country obsessed by safety and other issues, this seems like madness and could be improved on simply by following European guidelines. As for me, it leaves me seeing red. And on a multi-lane highway like this one in Denver, you'll notice that drivers are undertaking as well as overtaking. Now back in Britain, you'd quite rightly have the book thrown at you if you went past a car on its left. However, here in America, the land of free expression and so on, it appears you can do what the heck you like. And in my final tirade in this trilogy of what America has got wrong, take the road signs. Now most are clear and well positioned, but on the highways, watch out for the exits. No sensible 3-2-1 countdown like on the motorways. Here, it's very easy to sail by your exit, and who knows when the next one will be? You could be in another state by then. Now when it comes to red lights, there's one rule the Americans have invented which I wish we had in the UK. When you have to stop at a red light but you want to turn right, you can still do it even though the light's red, as long as there's nothing coming in the opposite direction. So here we are, red light, indicator on, nothing coming, and off I go. Now before you write in to complain that that can't possibly be legal, it is, and it was brought in as a very sensible measure in 1973 during the oil crisis when fuel was scarce. It was a way by which people could use efficiently every last drop of gas they had. Like us Europeans, the Americans like to go to the shops in their cars. The difference is the Americans like to go to each shop in their car. Say for instance, I've just loaded up with bagels and now I need to get to the sports shop to buy some exercise equipment to work it off. Well, you and I would walk, wouldn't we? Not here. This distance is definitely a car journey for Americans. This is the Chrysler stand at the Detroit Motor Show, and are you ready for a history lesson about another classic American car corporation? Now, Chrysler are going through a bit of a bad time at the moment, but historically, this is a company that has overcome many crises.
That's true, Howard, and did you know that Walter P. Chrysler was so intrigued with automotive technology and the way things worked on four wheels that he actually disassembled and reassembled a car before he even learned to drive?
Extraordinary, and he didn't have a box of spares at the end of it either.
Walter Chrysler was born in Kansas in 1875. He began his working life as a machinist's apprentice when he was 17. Chrysler turned his fascination for automobiles into a career by joining the Buick Motor Car Company in Flint, Michigan as a works manager. Buick became General Motors' first automotive division when GM incorporated in 1916. A year later, Walter Chrysler was named the division's president and general manager.
In 1928, Chrysler bought Dodge Brothers Inc., the automotive builders with a solid reputation for making vehicles with rugged dependability. The Dodge Brothers became famous for building the first car to drive into and out of the Grand Canyon. And by 1929, Chrysler had grown to become one of the big three leading automotive manufacturers.
Chrysler's commitment to research and development, even in the bleak 1930s, resulted in several Chrysler engineering innovations, including the patented floating power, an engine-mounting system which successfully isolated engine vibration away from the passengers and resulted in a smoother ride.
In the 1940s, American industry turned from consumer to defense production. Chrysler participated in many defense projects, most notably production of the 32-ton Sherman M4 tank. Chrysler produced 18,000 Sherman tanks, the main combat vehicle of the US and its allies in World War II. Chrysler supplied more than $3.4 billion in military equipment to the Allied forces.
After the war, Chrysler introduced the Town & Country sedans and convertibles and began limited production of its first hardtop convertible in 1946. In 1951, Chrysler introduced the first production power steering vehicle. Their first key-operated ignition and safety cushion dash were other Chrysler innovations of the early 50s, as well as the torsion air suspension system in 1957.
Drivers of Chrysler products built in 1955 were the first to enjoy the pleasures of Chrysler's all-transistor car radios. And 2 years later, curved side windows expanded the possibilities for automotive design. In the mid-1970s, petrol shortages, political uncertainty, high interest rates, severe inflation and weakening consumer confidence drove Chrysler into a financial crisis. American consumer demand soared for smaller, more fuel-efficient cars.
And then the cavalry rode in. Well, the guys from the White House anyway. Saved by loan guarantees from the U.S. government, huge investments were made in new car factories all across Greater Detroit. President Carter signed into law an act which provided Chrysler $1.5 billion in federal loan guarantees. Chrysler was now in good health once again, and with the successful K-series of cars, started racking up the bucks again. In August 1983, Chrysler paid off the federal loan guarantees 7 years early, at a profit of $350 million to the U.S. government.
In November 1983, production of Chrysler's minivans, the Dodge Caravan and the Plymouth Voyager began. The minivans created a new market segment and changed the way American families travelled. Minivans became Chrysler's best-selling vehicle, and the company was well on its way back to economic health.
Here at the Detroit Motor Show, more flair, style, and innovation from the Chrysler part of Daimler Chrysler. These days, Chrysler seems to be as innovative not just in its products, but in the way those products are launched. Here, the Cherokee arrives at the Detroit Motor Show. The driver shows he can handle the steps of the Cobo Center in this rugged 4x4, and then he doesn't let a silly sissy plate glass window get in the way. Absolutely smashing. And here, the press think a new truck is under the cloth, but it's actually above the stage, thumping its way to make a spectacular entrance. And how did they get this full-sized Voyager to leapfrog onto the stage? How did they do that?
Welcome to Bonnets and Hoods on a cold winter's day here in the United States. Now, since it was first introduced in 1996, this has been the best-selling convertible in North America. It's called the Chrysler Sebring, and since you'll probably never see one of these in the UK, why, come test drive it with me now, here at the home of Chrysler cars in Auburn Hills, Michigan. When I first moved to the United States, I actually considered buying one of these, but I was slightly underwhelmed by the 2.5-litre engine, which was a bit weedy, I thought, for what is actually quite a big car. Well, Chrysler must have been listening, because this, the 2001 model, has a bigger engine in it. It's 2.7, but surprisingly, it has made quite a bit of difference. Under the hood, the 2001 Chrysler Sebring has the 2.7-litre 24-valve V6 engine that delivers 32 more horsepower and 22 more pound-feet of torque than its 2.5 predecessor. Chrysler claim that the engine is nearly 10% more fuel efficient than its predecessor too, and is designed to operate on lower-cost regular lead-free fuel. The Sebring was designed as a convertible from the ground up. It's not a coupe conversion, and it really is an all-round four-seater family car. Not particularly sporty though, bit of a barge I think. I like the seat belt design integrated as they are into the front seats. It handles very positively, and that's partly due to a short, long-arm front suspension system that provides good balance between handling stability and ride comfort. And the rear multi-link suspension contributes to a refined ride and agile handling. I think the car looks really stylish from the outside, and as usual with American cars, it is beautifully appointed inside, lots of space, all the bells and whistles, and some nice little echoes of retro styling on the dashboard here. But in the UK, you've got plenty of choice for convertibles, and I don't think you'll miss this one particularly.
Well, I think from the very beginning, at a time when a lot of the American automobile industry was still being run by inspired tinkerers, Walter B. Chrysler, who had a real respect for engineering, embraced university-trained engineers. And this was a company that was very proud of the fact and emphasized that they were an engineering-driven company. Well, he was a practical mechanic who had the opportunity from his upwardly mobile family to go to university and turned it down. Over his family's objections, he took a job with the railroad because he was fascinated with machinery. Intensely curious, he embarked on an apprenticeship as a machinist, took correspondence courses in engineering, peppered the editors of the magazine Scientific American with queries, and all of his life was intensely proud of the fact that he had worked with his hands, always referred to himself as a workman. These are the tools, some of which he made as part of his apprenticeship, and to the end of his life, they were displayed on the observation deck of the Chrysler building in New York in a glass case, because Chrysler always wanted to emphasize that he was an American workman. Henry Ford really was someone who became a popular ideologue based on the fact that he was trying to produce a car that was suitable for the masses. And he did it at a time when the notion of his backers was originally that cars were something that should be sold to the upper class. That was a different approach than Chrysler took, because Chrysler's intent was to build a company to rival General Motors. And he was never interested particularly in producing a car for the masses. And this was a car which in 1924 featured a high compression engine that was revolutionary for the time, and a high-speed engine. This car would do an honest 70 miles an hour right off the showroom floor. And as a result, it became a very popular car entered in European road races. These cars did very well at Le Mans, Spa, a number of places, and they were competing with Bentleys and Alphas, Stutzes, much more expensive cars. Dodge had been involved in World War I, supplying what were really just touring cars to the U.S. Army. And in fact, what is supposedly the first mechanized cavalry charge was conducted in Dodge sedans. Willis Overland won the contract in 1940 from the U.S. Army to produce what was supposed to be a scout vehicle or reconnaissance vehicle that became known as the Jeep. Chrysler didn't actually take control of what became Jeep until 1987.
Oh, right.
What Chrysler did during the war mainly was produce tanks. And in fact, the tanks that, the Sherman tanks that Montgomery used against Rommel in North Africa were built by Chrysler and used a special Chrysler engine that they had tooled up because there was a scarcity of engines. And what they did was they bundled 5 automobile engines together to create a 450 horsepower tank engine.
5 together.
It was a real masterpiece of improvisation. And you can see that's the engine behind us.
Oh, that's it.
And it's
fantastic.
It was referred to as it was referred to by the soldiers as the Dion Quince, after the quintuplets born in Canada, or the egg beater. But as you can see, these are
4, 5. There
right.
You are. Huh. That's
And it was because it was tried and true technology, of course.
Yeah.
It was complicated, but it was marvelously durable.
That's amazing. What sort of spin-offs were there from this war period that then carried on through to production models?
Well, for Chrysler, there were a couple of notable spin-offs. One was that Chrysler had kept up with the combustion research that had produced the first Chrysler, and they became interested in hemispherical combustion chambers. And Chrysler was convinced that they could produce a piston engine on their own that would be superior to the Rolls-Royce Merlin, which was the main liquid-cooled fighter engine during the war. Mm-hmm. And what they did was they produced a hemispheric combustion chamber 16-cylinder engine. And that's the engine that we see over and back of the tank engine.
Yes.
And this is a V-block 16-cylinder engine, and it's really a remarkable piece of technology. But of course, what happened was, by the time they had this ready, the jet had made its appearance, and nobody was interested in an improved version of a piston engine. And so what they did after the war was they took this technology and put it in a automobile engine, which became the famous Hemi engine. Right. That was the main engine that Chrysler used during the 1950s. Mm-hmm. The other thing was that Chrysler took some of the truck engineering that they used in the war and sort of domesticated it. This is a power wagon produced by Dodge that was a military truck and remained pretty much a military truck, a famously durable design, and actually Dodge continued to make these vehicles with very little design change up until at least 1970. A lot of these were going for export by then.
Really? Now, things went well for Chrysler until the 70s. Then there was a problem in the 1970s. Tell me a bit about that.
Well, during the 1960s, Ford and GM began to diversify their brands. It used to be that if you bought a Chevrolet or a Ford, you were paying less money, you were buying a car of a certain size and a certain level of lux. But fundamentally, it was a size and power difference. By the 1960s, what happened was that each of these brands became a sort of entity in itself. There was a high-lux Ford, there was a low-lux Ford, there were different sizes, et cetera, and so on. Mm-hmm. General Motors did the same thing. Chrysler said, no junior editions. You can buy a Chrysler, you can buy a Dodge, you can buy a Plymouth, but we're not going to produce junior editions. They were very proud of the fact that there was no junior-sized Chrysler. Mm-hmm. Well, that worked fine until the 1970s when the first of the fuel shocks came. Right. And really the American auto industry after World War II, because petrol was so cheap here, had gradually got to the point it was an entity unto itself. It was producing these gigantic automobiles, tremendous engine and horsepower, and fuel economy wasn't a concern. Right. When the fuel shock hit, all of a sudden people became desperate to get smaller cars. Chrysler had just invested a tremendous amount of capital in developing new models that were all large, full size. And basically they were caught on the wrong foot. Right. Yeah. So what Chrysler had to do was embark on a crash program of coming up with suitable sized and fuel efficient automobiles. And Chrysler by then was the third ranked automaker, didn't have the resources of General Motors and Ford, and the company suffered terribly.
So how much of Chrysler's heritage can the company use now, or is using, to sort of, I don't know, help steer the company or to design future cars?
Well, Chrysler started out as an engineering-driven company, and even in the design excesses and the giddy sales years of the 50s and 60s, quality engineering was still a company value that remained. But when reality set in the 1980s, the engineering heritage stood Chrysler in good stead. And this car was produced as a concept or vision vehicle for Lamborghini at the time when we owned Lamborghini. Chrysler's probably building cars now that are as close to the ideal of what Chrysler was in the 20s, 30s, and 40s as it has in any time in its history. And it's sort of interesting that we now are merged with the former Daimler-Benz, because here you have two companies for whom engineering had been the touchstone. Right. That have joined together. Right. So in that sense, it's a very good match. The other thing is that Chrysler's doing some very interesting things in terms of marketing. Chrysler has always been a company that's tended to do well when it's trod a line somewhat apart from everyone else. When Chrysler came up with a PT Cruiser, they did something that, as far as I know, no other American company has done yet, which is produce a inexpensive but very trendy, sophisticated, and appealing car for the entry-level market.
Right, yeah.
And that was a vital thing for this company to do.
They really stuck their necks out there, didn't they, with that one?
Well, I think everyone was surprised at just how potent it turned out to be. In the company, the notion was that we were building a car that would have some success and would have world appeal, but I don't think anyone estimated just how potent that appeal would turn out to be.
I know, it's extraordinarily successful.
It has been extraordinarily successful.